Hey everybody, this is Space Marine Steve from Play on Tabletop, and I'm here at Hyperspace Hobbies with my good friend Ian. Hello, good morning, my man.
Good morning.
So, tell me a story about orcs. We were out for breakfast. You told me the story.
Yeah, so there's been some people rules lawyering the way that WoW works. I think rules as intended and rules as written kind of got a little muddy in that case. Essentially what it was is if you were inside a vehicle or if you were in Deep Strike, you wouldn't be benefiting from calling a WA because you weren't on the table at the start of when a WA happened.
Right.
But we all know that that's not how a WA should work.
No.
So they've changed the rules, essentially saying, now in a turn in which you call a WA, these are your benefits. Instead of you call a WA, these guys get those benefits from that point onward. But if those guys aren't on the table or if they're in a vehicle, they wouldn't get those bonuses. So you'd have guys charging out of a vehicle on the WA getting no WA bonuses, which just, I hate the idea that somebody would rules lawyer this and then it would become a problem, a big enough problem that Games Workshop would have to do something about it.
Yeah. So that clearly that must have happened at some kind of high profile event.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's really the only place that I could see an argument like that really taking place anyways. That, like, I've never argued that in my debate, the table that's over there.
No. But you might be able to, like the way that the rules are written, it sort of leaves a little bit of ambiguity in how you receive that information.
English is a really imprecise language. When you write rules, like, you have to be almost annoyingly precise in the way that you word things to make sure that what you want to happen is the thing that actually people perceive and takes place. I see how it happened, but should this argument have taken place?
I would say no. I think everybody knows what that rule is and its intent, but at a high level tournament, somebody would call this on you and they would try to get a win by abusing that rules as intended and rules as written. The thing with rules as intended is people can have in their mind a totally different interpretation. It's about how you're interpreting the words.
Yeah. See, so as a judge, so I run tournaments, and the tournaments that I run, whenever I make rules calls, oftentimes people will bring me a rule and ask, sometimes it's very simple. It's like, hey, can you just tell me how this works? I quickly read it over. Oh, like, this is the order in which it happens. Usually it's around ordering, like, because players do have like priority in games and like what happens first, what happens second. Yep. And those questions are somewhat simple, but they're confusing when you're in the game and whatever. However, instances like this though, where someone goes, hey, it says, like, WA says this, but also it says in the rules somewhere that if a unit's not on the battlefield, it's not affected by these kind of global things. And I would be like, I probably would have ruled against the guy arguing that doesn't take place.
Right.
Because it's weird to have an army-wide rule that doesn't affect a model in your army.
Yeah.
And I would choose ease of path of least resistance to make it the least clunky. Because it's weird when you're like, oh, okay, like, I call the WA, these guys get out, but this one unit, so we all have to remember this unit isn't WAing, but the whole thing is. It just feels clunky and weird. And so as a judge, I would go, this is the smoothest thing is as soon as they get out, they're under the effects of the WA because it's like a blanket.
And that's essentially what Games Workshop has changed it to be. It's if you're on the tabletop in the turn of a WA, you get the WA bonus, which is great. I think they cleared the rules up and now it works the way that it is intended to work.
Totally.
And on the same note, you said you were talking a little bit about how things happen, the staging and process of things. Now, if something says at the start of the turn or the start of the battle round or whatever, start of the combat phase, something triggers, you can't interrupt something that happens at the start with something that can happen at any point in that phase.
So they've even further defined what takes priority.
Yes, which was a problem. If I've even had games where my opponent and I were kind of bouncing our heads off the wall trying to figure out priorities, because I know if there's ties,
whoever's turn it is takes priority.
The person with turn has priority. But if both things say I go first or I can be used at any time then how do you judge which one actually gets the step? Yeah. So now they've defined that. If you have something that goes
at the start
of, you happen first, unless of course there's two things that say in the start of, then you can go with the priority. And if it says it happens, a rule triggers at any time in a phase, then you fall behind anything that happens first.
Yeah.
And subsequently last.
Yeah. Now, if people are at home and you come, like, let's say you're not at a tournament and judges are obviously not like within your reach. How do you manage when weird ordering things come up, or weird rules as intended versus rules of written, like, things pop up? How would you manage that at home?
Well, how we've managed it, if it's a small thing that isn't going to break the game, then we just go, okay, you think you're correct here, I think I'm correct here. Let's roll a dice on a 4-up, you get it, and we'll play that rule till the end of this, and then we'll do research to figure out what it actually is. So you're not really interrupting the flow of the game. You go, oh, it's a small thing, but I think it works this way, you think it works that way. Roll a dice, whoever wins, just bury it, play that for the rest of the game, and then do your research when you're done your game.
Yeah.
However, if it's something that is really big, that's going to change the entire game, and that's the point, is you showing up and playing a game, then you might want to stop at that moment and both try to find some research. The problem with that is that you can find arguments on the internet for anything. Yeah. So you might find arguments that prove one way or another way.
If I were you, I would reference rules and then tier it, like the rules in the codex usually will supersede the rules that are written in the rule book, but they do like kind of fit together, right? But what my suggestion would actually be? I would go with whatever makes the gameplay feel the most smooth. Because sometimes, like, if you are, like, for example, this orc thing, like the orc thing is so clunky and it doesn't make any sense. If you have to argue that something is the way that it is, it probably shouldn't be that way, and it probably isn't correct when you really get into it. In this instance, it ended up sort of being correct, or at least it probably wasn't correct, but the judge just kind of made the most cautious call that he could.
Yeah, like every game that I've played with orcs, I've never played it that way. Yeah. And every time I've played orcs, multiple times I've played against orcs, I've never seen anybody else play it that way. Yeah. It always is just, when it's a WA, that blanket falls over all the units.
And it's the way that it is, right? So I've never had that be the case, but I understand how the call was made. I'm not saying he made like the wrong call. I'm saying that I would have made a different call. And if I'm at home and I'm playing a game, whatever makes the gameplay the smoothest is usually kind of the right call, because it's like, don't try and shove the block into the circular hole, right? Like, if it doesn't seem to fit, or if you have to reference like 4 different rules to make this thing you want happen, probably isn't the case. Right? Like, I definitely remember playing, it was maybe a couple of editions ago, where you had to, like, I just remember being at a table and a guy trying to argue that, like, whatever outcome he wanted was actually the thing that would happen, and he was referencing like multiple rules and then a codex that neither of us were playing, and I was definitely like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, if you have to do that, if you said, oh, well, a judge made this call in some tournament that neither of us are playing in, and that affects these 2 things, because if you've got to take that walk and we all have to go down the rabbit hole with you, probably wrong. If you have to shave down the edges of that cube to make it fit, don't make it fit. Like, it's just not worth it.
But it's all, a lot of it is just like somebody's need to win or desire to win. And so they might go, well, you know what? I'm going to try to put up an argument just to see
If it fits.
If I can jam that square into the hole.
Yeah, maybe, right? So, I mean, it's possible that you might win that way, but don't. Just for those of us that are at the at-home players, because I'm imagining, like, I think that we have some competitive players in our audience, and I also believe we have some casual players in our audience. I think our audience is just people that love Warhammer. Yeah. And so I'm kind of speaking to the general population here. Don't argue it to death. Go with what makes the most, go with what makes the smoothest amount of sense, right? Because ultimately, the game is just an agreement on the two of you right now, and it's a social contract as much as it is rules written in a book. And what you don't want is to argue something to death and have your opponent be like, "Oh my god, I don't care, dude. Right. Like, this is painful." That's not what you want. You want the experience to be good for everybody. So find an experience that's good for everybody, right? We don't need to make these arguments.
Yeah.
Especially when they make very little sense.
Yeah, from that particular angle, for sure.
Yeah, totally. But that's what I think about it. What do you think about it? Do you feel like rules as intended, rules as written, where do you land on this kind of like argument? Because I feel like there are probably a lot of opinions out there. So shove them down to the comment section. We love talking Warhammer, and we want to talk with you. From all of us here at Hyperspace Hobbies, thank you so much for joining us. This is my good friend Ian, and I'm, of course, Space Marine Steve. Have yourself a good day.